Okay, let's be real for a second. When you think of the Old Testament, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For a lot of us, it's this dense, difficult, maybe even kind of alien book, right? It's got this reputation for being violent, full of weird laws, and, well, just strange. So, how on earth are we supposed to read a book like that today? What if I told you there's a much better way to see it? A way that can turn it from some dusty old artifact into a living, breathing conversation. Let's dive in.
And hey, check this out. It's a perfect example of that reputation in action. A news site in Norway described Greta Thunberg as an Old Testament Pippi Longstocking who, thunders and rebukes us. That one phrase just nails the popular image, doesn't it? Old-fashioned, super judgmental, and honestly, a little bit angry. But is that really the whole story? Or is that just one frame we've put around it?
So, here's our game plan. We're going to find a new way forward. First, we'll tackle the book's major PR problem by taking apart this flawed idea called the time capsule myth. Then, we'll look at two really powerful new ways to think, seeing a text as a catalyst and as an anchor. After that, we'll grab a compass to help us navigate some of the trickiest parts before we wrap it all up with this beautiful concept called samklang. All right, let's start with the biggest myth of them all. It's this idea that ancient books are like time capsules, right? That they're these perfectly sealed containers sent to us from the past, holding one single, unchanging message. It sounds kind of neat, but when you actually look at the evidence, that idea just completely falls apart. So this time capsule model, it assumes the text is this static, fixed thing. The belief is that if we just dig deep enough, we can find the original meaning the author intended and that it's been perfectly preserved all this time. But, the moment we look at the actual ancient manuscripts, this whole idea of a single, perfectly preserved text gets very messy very fast. Let me show you what I mean. Let's just take one book, Jeremiah. The version that's in most of our Bibles today, the Masoretic text, is actually way different from another ancient version, the Greek Septuagint. The Greek one is a full 20% shorter. And is not just shorter, the sections are in a totally different order. Now, both of these versions were floating around at the same time, so which one is the time capsule? The real answer is neither of them. The text was alive, it was fluid, it was changing even way back then.
And it's not just big sections of books. It's even the meaning of a single word. Look at this creature, Leviathan. In the ancient Greek version, it's a mythical dragon. Fast forward to Luther's Bible, and it's some kind of sea monster. By 1904, translators in Norway were sure it's a crocodile. Then, in 1985, they got a little less sure, calling it perhaps a crocodile. And in 2011, we're right back to it being an ancient monster again. This just shows so clearly that meaning isn't set in stone, it changes and evolves right along with us.
Okay, so if a text isn't a time capsule, then what is it? Let's try on a much more dynamic, exciting idea. What if a text is more like a catalyst? Something that doesn't just sit there, but actively sparks new meanings when it comes into contact with us, the readers. This idea has a name. It's called reception theory, and it basically says that meaning isn't just something you excavate out of a book. Nope. Meaning is what happens in the chemical reaction between the book and the reader. The text gives you the ingredients, but it's you, with your life, your culture, your questions, who co-creates the final dish. Let's see how this works with a real character. Just look at Job. For centuries, he was the poster boy for piety and patience, the guy who suffered and never complained. But then you get philosophers like Kant and Kierkegaard reading the exact same words, and they see something totally different, a philosophical figure they can use to debate the problem of evil. And today, a lot of us read Job and we see a rebel, a hero who stands up and questions God. It's the same text, the same words, but when the reader changes, the text sparks brand new, totally different meanings. Now, a text isn't just a catalyst for you as an individual. It also does something really powerful for groups. It can work as an anchor, giving a whole community a sense of stability, identity, and a shared story that lasts for generations. I want you to think of it like a living ecosystem. You've got the core text, the canon, right at the center. And orbiting around it is the community that reads it, argues with it, and lives with it. And then you have these institutions, schools, traditions, art, you name it, that shape how the text is understood. This whole system works together to anchor a community, while still giving it room to slowly evolve over time. And this all leads to a really profound point, which the scholar Wilfred Cantwell Smith summed up perfectly. Scripture is a human activity. You see, a book doesn't have any power just sitting on a shelf. Its power, its authority comes from what we do with it, how we read it, debate it, sing it, and build our lives and communities around it. It's an active, ongoing relationship. Okay, so these ideas are great, but I know what you're thinking. What about the really hard stuff? The parts of the book that are just uncomfortable? Well, the cool thing is, this new way of thinking actually gives us a compass to help us navigate those tricky passages too. Yeah, let's just put it right out there. What about the violence, the holy wars, the laws that seem so bizarre to us now? And what about the picture of God that sometimes seems so angry? We can't just skip over these parts. So how do we read them responsibly? Well, the very first step is to try and understand the world they came from.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. When you look at many of the traits of God in the Old Testament that make us uncomfortable, it turns out they were actually pretty standard ways of talking about gods in the ancient world. The God of Israel is a warrior who leads armies. Well, so were the gods of all their neighbors. God sends punishments and blessings. Yeah, that was kind of the job description for any major god back then. This doesn't make the violence okay, but it does show us that the writers were using the language and concepts they had at their disposal to describe their experience of God.
And that brings us to an even deeper truth. Really, all language we use for God has to be metaphorical. When the Bible calls God a king, or a father, or a rock, or a warrior, it's using things we know from our world to point to a reality that's ultimately beyond our full understanding. And that's true even for words we love, like just or loving. Those are metaphors too, drawn from human experience. Once you realize that, you can start to read these ancient descriptions not as literal facts, but as powerful poetry trying to grasp the immensity of the divine. So we've smashed the time capsule myth, and we've explored how a text can be a catalyst and an anchor. We've even got a compass for the hard parts. Now let's bring this all home with this really beautiful Norwegian word that gives us a new way to think about reading today. The word is samklang. It means something like resonance, a consonance, the sound of different things chiming together. And when we read, we can listen for this samklang. Sometimes it's harmonious. Everything just clicks, and our views align with the text. Other times, it's polyphonic. You hear lots of different voices and interpretations all at once, like the many faces of Job. And sometimes you get dissonance. The text clashes with our modern values, and that clash creates a tension that forces us to think, to question, and maybe to grow. And really, that's the big takeaway here. Reading an ancient text like the Old Testament isn't about trying to find a single, final answer that's been locked away in a time capsule. The real goal, the real adventure, is to join a conversation, a rich, complicated, messy, and beautiful conversation that's been going on for 3,000 years. The question is no longer, what does this mean? But instead becomes, how can I add my own voice to this ancient, ongoing samklang?